on your number one station, Star FM, sounding good all the time. And many thanks to the After Drive team, Saki Gracie, as well as Danny the DJ. Thank you so much, team, for keeping the nation entertained. Tinotenda. So, if you are just joining us, Amuna Kurasika. Chirongwa Disability Factor, a program that seeks to amplify the voices of persons with disabilities. And I'm your host, Siphathisiwe Mpofu. So, Zimbabwe hosts the 44th SADC Heads of State and Government Summit on the 17th and 18th of next month at the new Parliament building in Mount Hamden, and the summit gives the 16 SADC member states a platform to share ideas, craft and implement policies that are beneficial to all the people in the region. SADC has played a major role in the implementation of various sustainable development goals, chief among them SDG 4 on education, which also encompasses people with disabilities. SDG 4 aims to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education for all, and strides have been made in expanding the region's social policy framework to enhance focus on participation of PWDs in socio-economic development through quality education. In Zimbabwe, strides have been made in the implementation of SDG 4. However, more still needs to be done for people with disabilities to access quality education. Now, to discuss more on this, I'm joined in the studio by Deaf Zimbabwe Trust Director Barbara Nyangairi. And I'm trying to get a hold of the African Union Disability Council Ambassador Nyasha Nau. So he'll be joining us later on the line. But in the studio, I have Barbara Nyangairi, the Executive Director of Deaf Zimbabwe Trust. Good evening, Barbara. Welcome to the program.
Good evening, Patty. Good evening, Zimbabwe.
It's a pleasure having you, and thank you so much for making time to talk to us.
Thank you.
And so to you, our valued listener, please feel free to be part of this discussion, and you can send in your contributions to 0772 162 651. 0772 162 651. So, Barbara, we want to look at SADC's implementation of SDG, is particularly SDG 4 for persons with disabilities, and also trying to see whether Zimbabwe is on the right path in terms of the implementation of this policy framework and SADC protocols on education and training. So let's start by looking at the strides that have been made by Zimbabwe in meeting SDG 4 requirements and also promoting SADC protocols that support inclusive education.
Thank you, Patty. I think Zimbabwe has made a lot of progress in inclusive education, or education that advances the needs of children, even young people with disabilities. And we could start with the fact that Zimbabwe has ratified the SADC Protocol on Education and Training, which was done in 2000. And from there, Zimbabwe has amended the Education Act to ensure that we have provisions that provide for disability. We have drafted the inclusive education policy, which still has to be adopted, but it's a step forward, although we are taking a long time to make this a reality for children with disabilities. So there's been progress. The development of resource units for learners with various disabilities has also increased access to education for children with disabilities. So as a country, we are making progress, albeit at a slow pace.
Okay. And now that the country will be hosting the SADC Summit next month, running under the theme promoting innovation to unlock opportunities for sustained economic growth and development towards an industrialized SADC. We note that government introduced Education 5.0, which seeks to move the nation forward toward an innovation-led and knowledge-driven economy. But what gaps do you think need to be addressed in order to make educational institutions accessible and inclusive and ensure PWDs participate in the country's innovation drive?
I think education, access to primary education, which is basic education, is a priority, and we move on to access to higher education. Speaking of the SADC-wide access to education, the statistics show that 80% of children with disabilities in the SADC region have not accessed education. This is a huge number to leave behind. And for us to say promoting innovation to unlock opportunities are unlocked if there is equalization of educational access. That creates opportunities for children with disabilities to actually move and be able to take advantage of other opportunities for economic growth. So as a country, I think we still have a long way to go with regards to innovating for education. Some of the things that we could think about doing is the use of artificial intelligence in education, for example. How do we make use of software that converts text to speech or speech to text? Because learners have different needs. There are also visual assistants where your phone, you can actually download some of these softwares that will support access to spaces and narrowing the digital divide. COVID-19 showed us that many of our learners with disabilities struggled with access to ICT hardware, laptops and such digital hardware and software. And this already means that how do you innovate if you are not able to access the things that provide for innovation? So narrowing the digital divide, making use of automation, making use of other facilities. Like one of the things that our social workers who are deaf have been experimenting with in meetings at our workplace is using a software that converts speech to text because they are deaf. And so they are excited that they are able to see real time what people are talking about, even when you do not know that they are able to convert what you're saying to speak. So these are innovations that will move the dial in terms of innovating and ensuring better access to the curriculum for learners with special needs. There are issues of prostheses, prosthetics, things. Look at athletics that use those to run, and they could run faster than you and I because of the use of technology. That provides independence, that provides mobility, and that improves the quality of life for children with disabilities.
Indeed, the time is now 19 minutes to 9, and it is the Disability Factor on your number one station, Star FM, sounding good all the time. Thank you so much for making us your station of choice. And tonight we are looking at the implementation of sustainable development goals by SADC, and also trying to see if Zimbabwe is on the right path. And I have in the studio Barbara Nyangairi. She's the executive director of Deaf Zimbabwe Trust, and she's helping us with this discussion. And you can also join us live on Facebook. Follow Star FM live on Facebook. You can also share your thoughts, send in your messages. If you want to send to WhatsApp, the number is 0772 162 651. So someone is coming through. Anzi, I have a deaf daughter. Are there any groups or organizations I can link with? It was very difficult for me to find a school for her. Okay, Barbara is going to respond to that. Kana muine mibvunzo or my suggestions or just comments, feel free to send them to 0772 162 651. Barbara, looking at Article 4A of the SADC Protocol on Education and Training, it directs member states to widen provision and access to education and training, as well as addressing gender equality. How best can the region work together to ensure successful implementation of this protocol?
I think one of the things that I noticed in the protocol is that it doesn't speak much to disability inclusion. It speaks to disability in passing. And so we can actually say it is very silent on disability inclusion. However, SADC has made efforts to directly speak to issues of disability. So we can talk about the decade or of persons with disabilities that SADC actually had, and a whole decade of focus on persons with disabilities. We can also talk about the Southern African Inclusive Education Strategy for Learners with Disabilities, 2016 to 2020. These are coming very late. So the protocol was ratified in 2000, but in 2016, that is when we actually then create a strategy for inclusive education for learners with disabilities. So our pace is very slow. We need to move with speed, because many children with disabilities have been left behind because of the time that it has taken. So one of the things that seem to be a hindrance is the lack of commitment of resources to inclusive education. SADC needs to look at having a SADC-wide research on the state of disability education in all the SADC member countries, and be genuine and truthful to ourselves. One of the things that we have done with disability education is that we have put on faces. So, for example, you open a resource unit there and you say, we have made provisions. But what is in that resource unit for example, if you're talking about deaf learners, are there sign language interpreters in that space? Do they have the technology for them to be able to access education? The listener who spoke about difficulty in finding a place. Our Education Act in Zimbabwe says children must be educated in schools near their homes. It is not good for a young child to go into boarding school. But what happens when you go to a school and you're told that we cannot cater for your child? Or if they take your child, but it's merely babysitting them until they grow old and out of the school system. So I think as SADC, it's important to have a SADC-wide research on the status of disability education, so that we are truthful and we provide the necessary resources. One of the things that has also been lacking is the political will. Sometimes I could say that is true, especially when you look at Zimbabwe. It's been 5 years since the inclusive education policy was drafted. And up until now, it's still in draft form. It has not been adopted as a policy. How do we move with disability education when we do not have the necessary policies that support the implementation of disability education in our schools? What holds our head of schools, our teachers, our administrators accountable if there are no policies? Because a draft policy is not a policy.
Okay, I'll just throw this one to you, because the country is hosting the SADC summit next month. Murimi mainzi imbo draftai agenda. What would you include in the agenda? Zvamungade kuona ma heads of state vachidiscussa takatarisana nezvedisability.
I think one of the things that we would like to see is financing for disability in the SADC region. I think we have been let down by the lack of disability inclusive budgeting, as well as accountability when funds are allocated towards disability interventions. To what extent do they meet the needs of persons with disabilities? Because many a times creating such policies, having a talk show about it, does not achieve much if there are no resources allocated for implementation. So I think it's to look at what resources have been put in place by the member states towards disability programming, assistive devices, assistive technologies rather. One you can see that while we talk about it, there is a time in Zimbabwe when we analyze the education budget, and less than 0.02% had been allocated to disability interventions in our education sector. What does that mean? It means that nothing much will be implemented. So we remain in this space where we are saying resource allocation is very important to move the agenda for disability inclusion in our education system.
Okay, let me try and get some of the questions that are coming through on our WhatsApp platform. Chairman Black Moses, per Highfield Gym. And so what is being done on the ground to reach out to the disadvantaged in our remote communal areas, farmlands, and in urban areas too? Thank you so much for that question. Let's see. Anzi, thank you, my sister, for broadcasting such a program. I'm Godfrey Nyambo from Rosape Milestone School. Thank you so much for coming through. Anzi, hello. Ndine mwana ari deaf, mukomana ari kudzidza kunyadire. Ari kubhadharirwa ne-social welfare asi chikoro chiri kuda imwe cash zvekare ndizvo here? Okay, I hope Barbara can respond to that one. Anze, hi Siphathisiwe, it's Alice Musoro Ndipe. Oh, okay. Thank you so much. I will get in touch definitely. This one says, good evening. My worry why are we not having a policy having sign language as part of the language at schools, having posters and banners that teach people how to communicate with disabled people? I don't know. What's your comment, Barbara, to some of the comments that have come through?
I think I'll start with the last one. I think as a country we are making good progress. We now have sign language syllabi from ECD up to secondary school, which is a plus. I think for us it's the operationalization of those syllabi, the development of teaching material in sign language are the things that need to be worked on. But we are very excited that ZIMSEC has appointed a board member who is hard of hearing, which is a plus. Because ZIMSEC has been progressive in terms of providing inclusive assessments. So, for example, ZIMSEC has been looking into ways to ensure that assessments are equalized and everybody gets a fair chance to pass, including video exams, looking at provision where a person who's deaf can actually sign. So I think we are making progress as a country, but like I said, the pace at which we are moving means that many will be left behind because we are taking a long time to be able to put these measures into place.
Okay. Someone says... Peter Joripa Whitecliffe, thank you so much. Anza Isis Munogona. Are you referring to me or Barbara? But anyway, we do appreciate you. Anzi, can I have Barbara's number, please? Definitely, she will share her contacts, Tapedza program. Now that government has established vocational training centers across the country, what considerations do you think should be taken into account when enrolling persons with disabilities so that they are not left behind, like you have said, in terms of learning some life skills, and also what resources are required to equip my educators?
I think we noted that during COVID, when the lockdown was at its peak, it is craftsmen that were thriving. The builders did not stop building.
Yes.
The carpenters continued to work, the tilers, the bricklayers. It's people that have vocational skills and these technical skills that remained in demand when some of us were seated at home. And so vocational skills are very, very important in creating sustainable livelihoods. But we note that persons with disabilities have not been able to access them, even when there are no official qualifications that are required. So, for example, in vocational training centers where you are not even required to have an O level, but maybe just completion of ordinary level education only, you still see that the uptake of these skills, or the uptake of the opportunities is still very limited. So one of the things that seems to be lacking is career guidance, just not knowing what they could possibly do because they've not been exposed. I think as a country we have adopted the charity model for the longest. So shifting that and putting an empowerment mindset, an entrepreneurial mindset in our young people, that I can actually go to a vocational training center, I can acquire a skill and be able to take care of myself and my family, is something that needs to shift. But in addition, our vocational training centers are not disaggregating how many persons with disabilities have enrolled. And without that necessary data, how do you know what the needs are? Where are the gaps, and how do you? So it's important that there is disaggregation by disability in enrollment. But also, our vocational training centers do not have disability resource centers. I think we should celebrate the University of Zimbabwe for having a disability center, disability resource center. They call it the DRC. And in that space, there are various services that are provided, including sign language, including braille, audio, and other formats. So there is ways in which we can ensure that our vocational training centers are accessible for persons with disabilities to actually take up vocational training.
Okay, who is this one? Anzi Stanford Chuma. Anzi hi Siphathisiwe, ndinoda anzi tinoda kuti disability empower. Okay, anzi anzi sign language inofanirwa kudzidzwa kuzvikoro zvese zviri munyika. Thank you so much for that, Mr. Livewire. Stanford Chuma representing Highfield. Tinotenda zvikuru. Who is this one? Hansi Patti, sorry to come again, but still my sister is talking about the disabled guys. My problem is the society living with the disabled guys. If they can't communicate with the society, then they will they will live isolated. Ndix in Bulawayo. Thank you so much. I think he's referring to communities. Kuti, if they are not able then to communicate nevanu, what then can be done to ensure kuti society or isusu ma communities kwatigere tinoisawo that effort to maybe learn sign language, so that, because kazhinji mukazoona vanhu ava vakuenda maybe kunotsvaga ma-services panoita kusanzwisisana, because the way we then speak tiri kumba nemataurira zvinozoitwa zvaakumberi uko zvine kakusiyana. How then do we ensure kuti there's that balance kana kuti tiri kufambirana?
I think the first step that we have taken as a country, which will help harmonize and reduce communication challenges, is the fact that we now have sign language being taught in schools. And that is the beginning of a harmonization process where we are looking at what signs are used at home and the signs that are used in schools, and ensuring that there is uniformity of these signs. But we need to understand that every language is dynamic, and that even sign language is also a dynamic language which has its own culture, but they also have slang and other dialects within that language. So you find that in Mashingo, in Blawayo, Harare, Mutare, there is different ways of signing, which doesn't mean that people can't communicate. The major problem is our attitudes as families, our attitudes as communities to persons with disabilities. We need a mindset shift. We need to change the way we view disability and persons with disabilities. That will ensure that we are more embracing, more accommodative, and more tolerant and accepting of difference. So, in as much as we want to communicate, but imagine even within families, fathers, mothers, siblings do not learn sign language even when they have a child, a sister, a brother who is deaf. They still want somebody else to communicate. They are very basic. There is no fellowship or communion because people do not know how to communicate. So it's our attitudes that are the barrier, the largest barrier to inclusion.
Yeah, as we continue this discussion, so much to talk about. However, time is not on our side. But besides the issue of language as a barrier, what other challenges or barriers still exist in the country in terms of the country's implementation of SDG 4, and how can this be addressed?
I think it's access to facilities. There are fewer resource units than there is need, which has resulted in many children with disabilities not going to school. The resources allocated are inadequate for schools. Zimbabwe has experienced a brain drain. Teachers with special needs education qualifications have left the country for other places, and that has become a problem. We need to make sure that the disability module in our education is a compulsory module for teacher training and make it uniform, because Zimbabwe has adopted an inclusive education approach. Without having the disability module as a compulsory module, how then do we ensure that every teacher is able to provide services and support to learners with disabilities? So we need to change the way we are training our teachers. We need to change our focus and ensure that every teacher, secondary, primary, lecturers, everyone is able to understand disability inclusion, and therefore they will be able to really make sure that inclusive education is a reality.
And like I had mentioned earlier on, I was hoping to get hold of Mr. Nyasha now. He's the ambassador at African Union Disability Council. But he has sent me something. If I can, I hope I can manage to. It's quite longish, but I'll try. He says, "Good evening, Siphathi. It's Ambassador Now. I just want to thank Barbara for the contributions, and I don't want to repeat what she said for the sake of time. So in addition to what has been said, SDG 4 is there to ensure inclusive and quality education and promotion of lifelong learning for all. The key word is for all." I think Toto underline all. "I think SADC should identify short and long-term steps and prioritize tasks based on their impact to the people it serves. Then each member state should be delegated certain tasks for easy monitoring and accountability, not only for their individual tasks, but as well for the collective goals of the region. The good thing is that SADC is not only working on goals, but as well as solutions. While this is good, it also has to make sure that we, the people that the region seeks to address our problems, are involved in the planning. There is also need for access to information, as it will help both SADC policymakers and implementers, as well as ordinary citizens of all the SADC region, because they are equally stakeholders. This will help everyone to make informed decisions or contribute to issues pertaining to their constituency on informed positions. Thank you so much, Mr. Nau, for coming through with that contribution. Maybe let me also take some few messages before we wrap up. This one says, Anzi Shaw Inobatsira Chokwadi, God bless you, Star FM. Thank you so much, Peter Jory, pa Whitecliff. Anze Siphathi, I agree. Ne uyo ati sign language ngaidzidziswe kuzvikoro zvose nemunhu wese. This one says, Does sign language have a universal language like French, Shona, Greek, and so forth? This is Captain John Kambarami in Glenora. Okay. Vamwe varongoti thanks nechirongwa ndiani uyu maidelma kuchivere tinotenda zvikurusa. Anze, I want to know if children with autism are included in these educational policies. I have a 12-year-old son with autism who has never attended school because I cannot afford specialized schools for autism. Okay, Barbara will respond to that. Anzi vamwe vanovanza urema hwemwana wavo vachingomugarisa mumba anodzidza sei. This is Tawanda Matereke kwaseke. Okay, anzi Ernest Fulawo kumabvuku. Anzi it's true muzvikoro umu hamuna ma-resources anoenderana nevane disability. I think because of our time, thank you so much for the contributions. Let's see. Donich Tuzumo, I see you. Maishila Guruve, Chikokonya, Tinotenda. Anzi, this conversation makes us to be one. Star FM, okay. And keep on the good work and give us more network. Brian Chuma in Chegutu, thank you so much. Aiwa tinotenda. I think nekuda kwenguva dzedu kadzamanya regai ndingoti Barbara apete chirongwa nekudaira mimwe yemibvunzo yamatumira. Thank you so much for all those contributions that have come through. Barbara, your comment to what the listeners have said.
Thank you very much, Patty. I'll start with the issue of the cost of quality disability education, particularly for specialized challenges like autism, that it is definitely true. Many parents have struggled with finding placement for children with autism. Hiding children with disabilities and not sending them to school is actually a criminal offense. Our Education Amendment Act of 2020 actually criminalizes not sending your child with a disability to school. So parents need to create the demand, and therefore the supply will follow the demand. If we continue to hide our children at home, then it means that it doesn't show that there is need for facilities. So it's important that we bring our children out there and be able to demand for services. Sign language universal? No. Sign language is not. There is a efforts to try and create an international sign language, but as it is right now, Zimbabwe has its own. Even within the Zimbabwean, there are different dialects. South Africa has its own sign language, so there is no universal sign language. But I think for me, I agree with what Nyasha said, that there is need for commitment and genuine political will among our SADC heads of states to genuinely look at what is the state of disability education, where are persons with disabilities, where are the children with disabilities, put resources, create a time frame. The problem is we are taking too long. So as of now, it would be 24 years since we signed the protocol, but it's also 16 years later, then we do a strategy for inclusive education. We are not moving with time.
Indeed, like you said earlier on, Kuti, if as long as there is no data, apana kwatrukuenda, because we don't know kuti ma-resources ari kufanira kuallocatwa, ari kufanira kuenda akawanda sei, kuchikamu chipi, ndevana vakakura sei. We don't have all that information. But thank you so much to hama dzanguka ndokutendai ndikukuona yana mai ano tinotenda takunda murenje anzi alta mutare. Okay, thank you so much. Tinotenda zvikurusa. Kune vamwe vanga vachida kuti kana vachida kuti murambe muchivabatsira kana kuti vane zvimwe zvavari kuda kubvunza vanokubata ipapi.
Deaf Zimbabwe Trust nema social media pages atinawo. Tine Facebook page at Deaf Zimbabwe Trust. We are on Twitter at Deaf Zimbabwe Trust. Tine website at Deaf Zimbabwe Trust. And also, I think we can SMS or send WhatsApp to 0713 097 320.
Thank you so much. It has been wonderful hanging around with you guys. It has been the disability factor. I want to thank my guest, Barbara Nyangairi. She's the executive director of Deaf Zimbabwe Trust. And I also want to thank Nyasha Nau. I failed to get hold of him on the phone, but at least he managed to send in his contribution. Thank you so much, Mr. Nyasha Nau. He's the ambassador at African Union Disability Council. Tinotenda zvikuru nekubatirana nesu nekutibatsira kutyaira chirongwa chino. It has been the disability factor, like I said. My name is Siphathisiwe Mpofu. I also want to appreciate my producers Norman Muchemwa and Meredith Ngidi. So ngati sangane zvekare svondo rinouya, same time, same station, Star FM, sounding good all the time. Templeman and Tanaman are up next, but nase anzi aiwa mafaya emoji ameno anika chita kunaya because Platinum FM is also in the building. Aiwa tinokutendai. Thank you so much. Have a very good evening.
AI Revolution